What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another breakdown type of video for the Detroit Lions. This one is going to be a little bit different, but today we're going to talk about a player that has been with the Lions over the past few seasons, but hasn't really broke out yet. However, we know he's going to get that opportunity to do so in 2024. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to our video. Glad you guys are here, and yes, we are back with another breakdown video. Now, this is not going to be exactly like the draft videos that we do where I give out grades and those sorts of things. Instead, it's going to be more so just focusing on the note side that I take and showing clips of the player. And I hopefully will make this video much shorter than some of those breakdown videos. That's not necessary. But this was a video idea that really spawned from one of our most recent live streams, and I just brought it up like, yo, maybe we should do a video on this guy, because I showed some clips against the San Francisco 49ers, and I was like, maybe we should do a video on him. And I can remember the chat being like, yes, let's do a video on this player. And I didn't know how to attack this, how to approach this, but I was like, you know what? I'm just going to watch what he did last season, take some notes, where he improved, where I thought he was successful, and now I'm in a spot where I can kind of project what I think can bring the best out of this player heading into next season, and maybe areas that I think he's still going to need to improve to have that breakout season, because again, this player is going to get those opportunities. You know who I'm talking about? I don't know why I'm acting like you don't. You saw the title, you saw the thumbnail. We're talking about Jameson Williams, the former Detroit Lions 12th overall pick in the NFL draft. And when you take a guy number 12, there's pretty high expectations with that player. And again, we haven't really seen the breakout yet from this player, which is fair. I mean, the first season, we didn't really see him much at all because of injury he was recovering from. And then this past season, statistically, it definitely was a jump. Wasn't a breakout season by any means, but he also had the suspension, which was cut short, which ended up getting him back to the team a lot quicker. And then it was really Carolina the first time that we saw him this past season, because again, the suspension was cut short, but it was specifically the Baltimore Ravens game where we saw him the most. He took over 20 snaps in that game, but it was definitely not a good showing for him statistically. He was 0 receptions on 6 targets in that game. Not to say that was on him. Some of those passes, they were uncatchable. At the same time, there's also the aspect of he left some plays out there, especially towards the end of that game. So it was not a great, like, okay, here's Jameson Williams. Watch out, guys. Like, it wasn't that. With that being said, though, as the season went on, you started to feel his impact. 24 receptions on 42 targets, 354 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an 80.9 pass rating when targeted, as well as 5 drops that are tied along with that as well, with 14.8 yards per reception. It's perfect about doing a video like this is recently we got the quote from Dan Campbell that Jameson Williams is a man on a mission. And this, of course, is going to be a big opportunity for him, because I think right now most Lions fans maybe have more questions about the receiver position than anything. Have a lot of, we don't really know exactly what we have on the depth chart. A lot of guys that maybe haven't produced a ton at the NFL level. Donovan Peoples-Jones, it's been a couple seasons since we've seen a really big year. And with the Lions, it was more so flash plays. Didn't really see him in the postseason, so it's not like a recent memory of like, wow, remember Donovan Peoples-Jones? He wasn't really utilized much then, but in the flashes during the regular season, I can say that I think on paper, the skill set should really offset a guy like Jameson Williams extremely well. And Donovan Peoples-Jones was successful. Even when he wasn't getting the ball, he was successful at getting open. He knows how to get open. He has a different skill set. But the Lions have a lot of that. And then, of course, they have Amon-Ra St. Brown. But behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, don't forget Khalil Freeman. I always forget Khalil Freeman, but that guy's a dog too. So this is one of those positions that does have some questions for fans. I do think the Lions brought in some really interesting UDFA signings. Isaiah Williams obviously standing out there. Traquan Smith. The competition is going to be real. We actually did a show today on Bleacher Report going through the depth chart. The guy that really stands out to me would be Caden Davis, I think, for competition with a player like Antoine Green, because even though he was a draft pick, I don't think he's specifically like a lock to make the team. I think he will, but I don't think he's a lock to make the team. So what the Lions have is they have multiple players that we just don't really know yet. There's some projection going on there, and maybe it's small sample size. So I wanted to take time out to do a video on Jameson Williams to really talk about how he can break out this next season. And what we saw last year, just kind of recap what we actually saw from Jameson in his first real season. I mean, this is 12th pick in the draft. You have high expectations for a guy that's drafted that high, and we really haven't done a video specifically for this player. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to do so. So that's essentially what I did. I went back through, rewatched his last season, took notes of the player, and today we're going to talk about what I liked, what I didn't like, some of my notes from last season, maybe some areas where I think he'll need to improve for the Lions, but also how the Lions maybe utilized him a little bit differently as the season went on and found ways to have success with this player, where he can have success, and honestly, statistically speaking, at the end, why it should be successful, like why there's reason to believe, because I know there's always going to be questions. Well, does this fit well with Jared Goff? I mean, he's a vertical threat. Is this ever going to really work? And why I do believe that we have seen reasons to believe that this will work with Jared Goff. We just have to go about it the right way, and that takes both sides putting it together. So with that being said, who is Jameson Williams? Well, we know who the guy is. 12th pick in the draft, 6'1.5", 180 pounds coming out of the draft. He's now 23 years old for the Lions. But I'm just going to dive right into it. I'm going to show some clips as we talk through it. And then at the end, we'll kind of help pull this thing all together. But let's start off with him in terms of his hands. Now, this is an area where honestly, it was such a weird beginning. I just threw my pen. A weird beginning with Jameson Williams because at the beginning of his career with the Lions, it was like, yo, can this guy catch the football? Like, there was real questions of that because preseason was shaky. It was a rough beginning. It was dropping easy passes, and we're like, what is going on here with this guy? And then all of a sudden, you get to the end of last year and watching him at San Francisco, biggest moments, and he feels like he's the guy that's rising. When a lot of craziness is happening, the young Jameson Williams is the guy that's rising to the occasion. Now, he left plays out there. He left a big play out there. Hands on the football in the end zone for a touchdown on a trick play. That being said, though, he felt like he rose in that game. And you saw the contested grab, you saw the focus, you saw the body control, and it's just been a weird progression with Jameson Williams. I think it's a great point that, hey, it takes some time, all right? It takes some time, especially when you miss the amount of times that he has had to miss. But I think this is also still a category he needs to work. He needs to continue to get better, especially when you talk about specifically tracking the football over his shoulder. That just in general needs to get better. Tracking down underthrows, slowing his body back to the football, not just finding it, but slowing down, positioning himself back to the football when the ball is underthrown. Those are things that I definitely think he needs to work on, but just in general, this specific trait has grown as a Detroit Lion. And there's also some aspects that maybe I don't even notice, like this, for example, the way that he squares himself to the quarterback to become a target with real body control that I don't really notice when the game is live and it's happening. You don't really notice these little things, but you see that ability to flip himself to the ball. I thought a huge part of last year, I know I've talked about those over here, was the timing. Timing's everything in this Lions offense, right? For Goff, through his progressions, it's all about timing, hitting your landmarks, being where you're supposed to be, because if you're not, we're probably going to throw the ball to the other team. And I thought that improved so much. Him being able to find those spots, improve his timing, make himself a target for the quarterback. And that's one thing that he does well with his hips, squaring himself to the quarterback. Also, I love the toughness aspect as a pass catcher. So at his frame, at his build, probably not something that you would expect that I would be talking about here again, especially if you just watched how it began with the Lions. But that being said, when Brad Holmes drafted Jameson Williams, right, we understood, man, this guy could play on special teams. He could play as a gunner. It was the toughness. Lions talk about toughness player. We're all talking about, man, what is his 40 time? What is this dude's 40 time? When you watch Jameson Williams, you can't help but walk away and be like, this guy's tough. This guy is tough at the catch point. He willingly accepts the challenge at the catch point, and he is not afraid to go into traffic to try to pull the ball down in traffic. He doesn't pull himself out of those spots, and that's just fresh in my memory because, you know, going through the draft, there are definitely guys in this draft that I thought would. He was not that type of player. He hasn't been that type of player, and that has been a huge aspect where I think you pull back to what Brad Holmes said and what he said about Jameson when we drafted him. His ability to welcome contest and middle field contact, you love that. And Lions buy into those things. They buy into those characteristics of a player, and you'll see that toughness. Now, I do think that he lacks real play strength, specifically at the catch point. I thought it showed up a lot more towards the beginning of this passing. Again, Baltimore was a rough example. Clearing out, creating space, some of that is the route they are asking him to run. I think there are certain routes that just don't suit him as well as other routes. Also, other times it's control. It's being aware of oncoming defenders that kind of catch him off guard, and he gets knocked off balance. I think there's some of that too, but he's also just not built to physically create tons of space at the catch point. That's still not really been who he is. But when you talk about being willing to take the hit, willing to play through traffic, willing to pull it down in traffic, deep tracking speed. Now, we know he has vertical speed. He can go, all right? He's got the juice. But at the same time, he does also showcase vertical deep tracking speed, being able to look back for the football and still be able to carry speed vertically and not necessarily pull himself back. That doesn't mean he always tracks it well, but he does show vertical tracking speed. He's also a hands catcher that at chest high, he's going to utilize his hands to bring the ball in, yet he's still natural as a body catcher, specifically the underhand technique on his stomach, pulling it down in those spots. He's natural in those spots. You'll see a lot of those, but you don't get a lot of bobble when the ball gets to his body. It's a pretty clean process and pretty clean technique for him. And while I do have questions at time about tracking timing to attack the football, I do love the fast hand control as well. Not only just scoring back to the quarterback, but also having that body control to reach back behind him, get into different spots, and carry that body control through the catch point. That's something that we've had with a lot of our vertical threats. Josh Reynolds, DJ Chark. I always think about DJ Chark's like dig. I think it was against Jacksonville where he just pulled it from behind. he has the capabilities to bring those kind of things to the table. Tracking eyes, losing focus. I think tracking just in general, over the shoulder, right? Dealing with contact, battling at the catch point, but still being able to maintain focus. I think tracking in general is just an area that needs improvement for him. I can remember back to training camp. I don't know if this is what they were working on, but they would throw like the little balls over his shoulder and he would catch them. I don't know if that's exactly what it's for, but I would assume it's over the shoulder catching, a small ball. That is like one of those things that I just think in general he's going to have to improve on. I think there's times where you watch and you're like, okay, Goff, maybe if you put the ball a little bit higher, obviously give him a better chance to find the football. And then there's the flip side where you're like, he still needs to be able to track this football. And in this case, like here against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where he pushes off Carlton Davis, I do like that he utilizes that subtle little push off at the catch point to create separation. He does it most times vertically, but here where he's not finding the football, his eyes specifically are looking at Carlton Davis and he can't find the ball on the play and he doesn't know where it is. Those kind of things need to kind of get minimized. Now, I think some of that is also timing, because there are other times where he's running vertical and he seems to be looking back to the quarterback, trying to figure out if the quarterback threw the football. That also can dial in. Like, hey, he's throwing the ball. Okay, you should know at this point in the route the ball is going to be up. Improving hitting his landmarks and the pacing within that, not dealing with so much contact so early in the route could help him out a little bit as well, because he could probably get to where he wants to be a little bit faster. He doesn't feel like he's having to make up ground. The game just slowing down from in general. That happens with a young player. I think obviously that's along the way something you're hoping that's going to improve. That being said, though, I think there's a lot of areas where you can look at his game and say he's improved here. He's improved here. So it brings me optimism for this is a player that's not like you're getting the same Jameson Williams next season you had last year. I think you're going to get an improved Jameson Williams. I think Dan Campbell's quote is real that he's a man on a mission. I haven't seen him in practice, but I can tell you just from watching back 2023, there are certain traits of his game you're like, that looks better. It looks like he changed something up here. It looks like this looks better. There's a lot of those, and we'll talk about those. When you talk about his ability to get off the line of scrimmage, again, this is an area that I think just needs work in general. But that being said, there's still a lot of great traits that he carries here. And if you remember, like Josh Reynolds, right? He had some inconsistencies getting off the line of scrimmage, but he was still going back, I believe it was 2022, was like one of our best man coverage beaters. And you guys know I'm always focusing on that. But he carries the quick feet at the line of scrimmage, and you'll see that kind of the quickness. You'll see it him opening up drags, like against Green Bay. We also saw it against New Orleans, for example. He does, however, carry striding footwork, which I think can slow his transition out of single-step release, where he will lose airspace, like Green Bay, Tampa Bay, Jamel Dean, wider, and in that case, it can kind of slow down the process. So if he doesn't get a really good sell on kind of that single step and the cornerback's discipline, they kind of sit down, he doesn't really pull a cornerback off of his spot, and then he doesn't really carry the route strength to work through it always early on the play. His hand usage had to improve, which I think it did this past season. I think things like that could pop up as an issue. He also has a linear release package where he struggles to get super wide on the play, create a lot of agility laterally, and also extra steps to corner and create tight angles. Loses instant gas until he gets into that second stride. We saw that, for example, against Tampa Bay, Carlton Davis, where he's working inside outside. By the way, I don't know how Carlton Davis even got into a spot like this against a guy that's that fast. Would see that. Like, he would have to create extra steps to try to get out of some of those tight angle spots. That being said, though, he does carry a lot of traits. Now, we know him as a vertical threat. Immediate takeoff when clean off the line of scrimmage. So this can be created by how the Lions utilize it, whether that's, let's get him in motion. Let's get him off the line of scrimmage. We can create these things. A fast motion. We'll have you turn the corner at the snap. We can create this, but it's also still maybe it's just the coverage they're playing, right? They're playing zone coverage. They're backed off. They're not pressing you at the line of scrimmage. Other times like that, like immediate takeoff ability. This doesn't mean you always are running at full speed, but he has that ability to immediately get upfield, and he also has that bend to create that as well.
And I think what's massive in his game is footwork control. Here against San Fran, it's a little bit less sudden, and sometimes there's times where you feel like he's using extra footwork that's not really necessary, but it's really the top of the route here. It's the pacing through to allow himself to sink, get back to the football in this comeback route. It's not perfect, but it does work much better than what we saw maybe earlier in the season in terms of some of the pacing into the top of the route, where it was almost impossible for him to separate at all, and it was also very predictable. So really trying to dial back and improve that discipline, and I did see improvement even in a rep like this. Then here against Baltimore, being able to kind of shrug off the inside leverage. You see the lateral foot quickness. You see sufficient knee bend. I think he also parries some good ankle flexion as well, the knee bend to plant and push upfield. But you do see that quickness. It's really about the control. It's that decisiveness within his footwork, which really can give him a good sudden sell, and that shows up through the entire route.
Also, we saw last season he needed to improve his hand usage, and this is something I thought throughout the year got better. Like against Denver, you would see him get held up on routes where his hands didn't always seem to be ready to kind of battle. That sometimes was at the release. Sometimes it was a little bit into the stem of the route where it was like early route, kind of again, they're hanging on his shoulder, they're just pulling and slowing down his route, and he's not always ready to battle and fight that off. I thought that improved. I thought the readiness with the hands really improved, and being willing willing to lean into kind of more the physicality side just in general, I think will help him going forward. Sometimes his footwork wasn't necessarily clean, like where he would try to speed up his single step here against Tampa Bay, and you see him stumble out of the route. Still, he gets vertical and over the top on his play, but he tries to speed it up. Footwork isn't necessarily clean on a play like this, a little bit indecisive, all right? It's not as crisp, and all of a sudden you have him stumbling out of the route. Still a lot of traits that I like about his ability to get off the line of scrimmage, and there's still a lot of footwork things that really impressed me when I was watching. For a guy that's a strider, right, he's a little bit linear, you would expect like, okay, this could be a real problem at times. Still, I think there's a lot of great traits about his ability to get off the line of scrimmage, a lot of upside here, where if that's continued to be improved upon, his ability to beat a lot of different looks at press coverage could really open up, and that's going to create a lot of success because, one, a ton of teams don't play press anyway, but two, it's going to open up the ways that he can continuously beat man coverage regardless of who he's matched up against. He brings shake within his stabs. He also carries short area quickness, and he does a really nice job of coming to balance, like keeping his feet under him, not necessarily lunging early on plays. He also has the burst, as we talked about, the ability to just go that takeoff where he can attack bail coverage immediately, like this little double sink move here against the Vikings. He could just attack a coverage just trying to bail out and really put stress on you instantly. Part of the reason I really think some of the motion, turn, get upfield really helped him, some of those fast motion looks, because he could immediately just turn on the Jets, press cornerbacks, and get them into tough spots. For now, all of a sudden, they were reacting to everything he did. They were on their heels. They weren't necessarily dictating it, and I think that in general is going to help. But you want to have a guy that's well-rounded. Like, you want him to improve, like, okay, we can put him on a line. He can deal with the press. He's going to win differently. He's not going to win with, like, I'm just going to shove off this guy. He's going to win a different way, but he also, I think, carries a lot of the traits that you would want. Like, for example, this dead leg step on this long stride, again, against Tampa Bay on this in and out, you do see it, and he does this on double moves. This is where you see a lot of his double move success going back to Bama, where you can kind of just dead leg. And he does a nice job with his footwork in these instances, where he does a really good job of selling it into the top of the route, but also being able to create, sometimes, again, he'll rise, but he can create kind of that sudden dead leg bam, which a lot of times is how he creates space at the top of the route through curls, where he kind of lunges his leg out so he can get back to the football and create some distance between him and the cornerback. But here, to be able to do that off the line, to kind of like, boom, just kind of slam on the brakes with one leg and then hop back out the other side, I think that shows a lot of upside. As a pure route runner, this discussion, I think one overall thing you do see, and this is just going to impact kind of his route tree, is, you know, just taking a little bit longer to get out in and out of breaks. And I think at times you can improve this, depending on what breaks you're asking him to do. You can also improve this as well. To me, I just think he struggles a little bit to sink at the top of the route. He's kind of forced to stride out. I don't think he brings a ton of like dropping his weight necessarily. Like, you'll see some ankle flexion. I think you see some flexibility. He also could be a little bit rounded trying to turn the corner, but he doesn't drop his weight extremely well, and it's not instant. There's a little bit of beating the drum when he gets to the top of the routes. That being said, though, what you like about him as a route runner is that he rolls his hips over to square with the quarterback, position in front of a cornerback, so say on out routes, for example, his over routes. So this is where it comes back to route tree, and I thought what the Lions did this season on, though, if you watch back the Baltimore game and you look at the target, there was a couple vertical ones where it's like, man, I would like to see a play being made here. But the other ones where it was the deep out, you know, he's got himself in a position where he could have caught the ball. Ball was a little bit underthrown, didn't come up with it on the play, trying to scoop it off the turf, not keeping his feet in bounds. But then the other ones, like the deep curls, the deep comebacks that they kept running on, the Lions kind of pulled back from a lot of those. Not to say they didn't run any more deep curls or comeback routes in the future, because they did, but a lot of times they would set them up a lot differently than what they did against Baltimore, where a lot of it was stationary. A lot of it was like, okay, hit the landmark and break back and get to the football. Just that's it. We're not going to move anybody. Just run your route. And I thought that really limited his ability to have success. And that game looked really rough. But as the year went on, they seemed to kind of pull away from a lot of those stationary looks, because that's just not his style as a route runner to get himself open. Routes like these over routes with kind of a diagonal entry point into the route break, it allowed him to maintain speed. It's something that he does extremely well. And you see it, like, why does he constantly stack guys level 3? Like, why are his deep post and corner route? Why is he always open? Well, one, he sells it well, but two, he also strides. So we talk about him being a stride. He strides out of these cuts. So when you get him on some of these diagonal looks, whether that's motion or you whether just run it to ask him to run an over route, where it doesn't necessarily have to be like run straight vertically, plant, and then dig 12 yards. Like, depending on the coverage, that's going to work. But against like man coverage, that's pressing him off the line, getting his hip, he's going to struggle to separate in those spots. I think he could improve, like leaning in again, changing his pace a little bit, being a little bit more unpredictable there. And I think early in the season at times it wasn't.
Like, to me, this first clip looks better, though you don't get as much suddenness or push at the top of the route, but it's almost trying to make it all kind of look the same. Versus a play like this, where you could see him really push aggressively, but the sink at the top of the route just isn't there, and you can clearly tell when he's rising to sink at the top of the route.
games like the Saints on this comeback route where his pads rise into the sink. This is another thing. He also has a little bit of a tell. So he'll rise clearly when he's just trying to sink. And again, some of these more stationary, like let's go run a comeback route, you'll see his pads actually rise. Let's carry a lot of savvy. First thing would be, again, while again, he doesn't really drop his weight extremely well, that little lunge at the top of the route, especially when he's not forced to work at full speed, if it's off coverage or if they're in zone, he doesn't necessarily have to kind of race himself to that spot where he's going to struggle to get in and out of that spot really well. What he does have is that ability to lunge and separate at the top of the route. He also utilizes his head really well within terms of the discipline here to kind of push coverage, avoid excessively beating the drum. We saw that against the LA Rams. Same way that we would see him kind of separate at the catch point with the little push off, the subtle little push off, he would do that same thing kind of on out routes where he would use his off arm to create a little bit of separation. So you did get some savvy there as well. Like for example, the deep out that he had against the Denver Broncos. He maintains route speed through over routes and deep post. And this is where again that savvy starts to show up, where you'll see him use his little head shake at the top of the route to press a half turn corner. So again, carries the footwork and the control, where a lot of times you'll see his ability to kind of work through traffic, where you can kind of just hop over traffic. You'll also say the same thing when the ball is in his hand as well. Now, as I touched on, I think he's a little bit stiff when you talk about leaning around through dig routes like against San Fran, and you'll have situations, even at times this will pop up on out routes, especially if he's pushing with a lot of vertical speed. Not if it's like a speed out. Break loose a little bit and the route kind of ends up not being necessarily as flat as you would like it to be, and it becomes a little bit upright. There's extra steps. It's not as flat. Again, he just plays a little bit taller in those spots. Touched on the speed out routes. This was an area that he was successful. I think Minnesota Vikings, we utilized him multiple times in this game, and that was a team that played a lot of cover zero. You know, they also played a lot of quarters in that one, and you would see the vertical push speed, which obviously puts everybody on their heels immediately, and then also he has that ankle flexion and the discipline. The discipline shows off a ton. I didn't expect this much route discipline within his game, and now there's some areas where I think that breaks loose, specifically on dig routes. That's great discipline into the top of those routes, keeping his eyes forward, really selling it before working into that out route, not really giving a tell before he's getting into it. It constantly creates separation when he runs those routes, which is huge. That's where, you know, Goff could do his quick 3-step drop from under center and get the ball out, fly it out to the flat 5-yard out route. That's how we can start to open up some of the level 1 routes where it's not always, you know, hey, everything's got to be a shot over top. Same thing with the hitch routes. Off coverage, zone coverage, we start to open up the hitch route success, right? We saw that in the playoffs a little bit, where you can kind of just sit him down under it. You saw it against Minnesota. Just sit him down under it, push 5 yards, sit down, and we'll just get to the ball really quickly. He has that foot quickness. He can flip himself back to the ball pretty quickly. He plays with the control at the top of the route. And again, in those spots, he's not having to push vertically as fast as he can, but instead just understanding that it has that speed, has the threat to do it. And we'll continue to talk about some of the football intelligence that I think plays into all of that as well. He has strong discipline in his vertical push. We see it against San Fran on this over route where he sells outside on Thomas and he creates that space. Talk about beating man coverage just like this. And this is where you not only see the pacing, but again, at the top of the route, he has that ability to, again, with his footwork, it's really clean, and he could also kind of jab outside. He constantly throws his head with it before he breaks back. He maintains speed throughout the break, where the cornerback, you know, they're guessing. It's really difficult for them to maintain that kind of speed, and as the route gets on longer and longer, he ultimately just starts to create more and more separation because he just has that vertical speed. And if they can't get him off the line of scrimmage, now they're in a really bad spot if he can get off the line cleanly. So that's where it's like, hey, we can continue to dial this in. This is going to be a real problem. He holds eye discipline on speed outs. He has the head shake into curls. We saw that against the LA Rams. Like here, it looks like he's running a fade route, and he gives you kind of that head shake, and he sits himself down, parks himself down on the route. His over route cuts are sudden. I think you see the same thing on corner routes as well. His timing on dig routes. So now you get to the FBI side. This was where I thought during the season he improved a lot. We saw it against Denver when he kind of just sat himself down. He's like, here, I'm a target. We saw it on the crossing route that he was running where Goff started to roll with him, and he just kept making himself target. Like he wasn't afraid to, like, I'm going to run out of bounds because this guy's going to hit me. He was like, I'm going to stay right in your vision. I'm not worried about a guy hitting me. If you want to throw it, throw it. And I loved those little things, his willingness. And to me, the timing on the dig routes was huge. It was like dialing it in, like, bam, I'm going to be where I'm supposed to be, and you can rely on me being in the spot where I'm supposed to be. And he got that thing dialed in. I think the football intelligence is massive with this player because he does an excellent job. He was one of our best receivers last year at opening up other players, not just because he's fast. We know that's an aspect of it. Times, like what a team wants to do coverage-wise, maybe you're saying 2 deep safeties, right? Or a cover 3. All of a sudden, okay, now there's a real threat here. And we'll show some examples of where that gets difficult for them to communicate and pass off routes. And now all of a sudden you're opening up, maybe not him, but you're opening up an opposite field route because now you got to respect this. We saw it against a San Fran, right? Where he pushes over the middle of the field. His timing within stack routes, where he stack up, run a corner route, and someone would run maybe like an out route underneath it or just a more shallow corner route. He'd open himself up. We obviously saw a touchdown against Chicago where he got the football on one of those corner routes. So those are some of the instances where you see him dictating coverage, not just because of speed, but also the timing and the football intelligence that would show up within the route as well. Now, Sean, you know, the hitch success. He had proper pacing for the short intermediate curls with the foot quickness to flip to the ball, ability to kind of like kill his route and then push it back up vertically where he could kind of just slam on the brakes and keep going, not to come to a complete stop, but he was able to, with his footwork, kind of plant it and then push back off. That was huge, and we saw that at Alabama. We saw that flashes with the Lions. I don't think we've seen that enough with the Lions, but I think it will start to open up this next season in a full season, hopefully, that we're able to see a little bit more of that. We saw outside leverage cornerbacks, his ability to kind of press those and open himself up back to the middle of the field. And then you talk about dictating coverage of just being a factor on the field. You know, his ability to get over top of cover 3, beat the opposite side cornerback over top, meaning like, hey, you know, cover 3, if I run a deep post, and let's say the opposite side cornerback, he's dealing with the guy that's running a deep dig route, he might pass that off, safety dives down, he might be responsible for dropping off and picking up that post route that's coming his direction when it's passed off from the opposite side cornerback. He has the ability to get vertically and really stride out of that break into the post route, but also change the pace where by the time that cornerback wants to just pass it off to somebody, that opposite side corner isn't really in a spot to get to the play. That's how fast he gets through those spots. So now it dictates coverage because now you start to pull a little bit faster. Like, hey, I might have to help out a little bit faster here. We even saw times where the ball didn't even get out of the hands, but you would still see like, oh, this would have been open. This would have been really open if we could have just got the ball out in this spot. Obviously, a lot of things have to come together for level 3 success. That's why statistically there's usually not a ton of numbers there across the league. 8 up off coverage versus the Vikings in Denver. That's where we saw him just destroy a team that wanted to play back over and over. He just destroyed that. Now, his deep curls are limited, and this is, again, a route tree where I just don't think that, you know, you're going to want him to live because he won't win with strength, and his force to kind of slow his pace to get in and out of the break. But I do think that he can improve with more consistent, you know, attacking a blind spot of a route, pressing the blind spot of a route. But again, you saw against the LA Rams like this deep post where Goff gets sacked on the play, but the way it would have opened up over top. He plays with good body control out of curls, like constantly his footwork, like on the play where Goff kind of slips against the LA Rams, he's working back to the ball. He shows that body control within the lower body to, again, work back to the football in those spots. Turning the corner at the top of the route can take multiple steps. It can force him to get a little bit wider, and we do see that, especially the further downfield it gets and the tighter of a cut that you're asking of him. But he constantly puts cornerbacks and safeties in conflict. So, again, cover 3 stacks. Saw that against Baltimore. You'll see it. I love the idea of matching this skill set with Peoples-Jones, where you have a Peoples-Jones who's dominant on in-breaking routes because his ability to separate the top of the route, he creates separation through contact, he kind of breaks his route off, he's good with timing as well. And then you have Jameson, who on the other side is vertically such a threat, where it's like you have to get off your routes a little bit quicker, like we saw against Dallas, right? Where Dallas, he's running the deep post, it's quarters coverage. The safeties, you know, don't take it over top. So all of a sudden, he almost dictates like, hey, safety's got to take it, and cornerback has to be aware of this, because as soon as that safety says I can dive down, cornerback deal with it one-on-one. And because Jameson Williams, one thing he does well discipline-wise, he sells really well, like this thing's going outside, and he'll press it with his outside foot, he'll slam his head that direction, and then he pops back upfield, and he explodes out of that, and he creates so much instant acceleration where the cornerback is kind of building it back up. Now, all of a sudden, if that safety didn't decide already, like, I'm going to stay back, that's over top, and he's just going to run away from him. As the play rolls on, he just creates more and more separation, so you get a shot play like that. Do think that where he loses some discipline is dig routes, as I touched on. I think at times his eyes would kind of start to peek in a little bit early before he would even begin his footwork. Like we see here against the Rams, it's a level 1 route underneath, where it's like almost like his eyes starting to peek that he's going outside before he even breaks outside. Now, linebackers reading the quarterback's eyes. He starts to peek outside. His footwork is not getting there yet, and that's an instance where you could potentially read what his body language is in those spots. You know, dig route second level, where safeties will be able to sit down and dive on his routes, where he'll start to kind of just lean like, hey, I'm going inside, instead of like really selling, I'm going outside when he's trying to walk up into a dig route. Maybe it's 2 deep safeties, and in those 2 deep safeties looks, he'll kind of start to lean that direction. Safety's just going to sit and jump on that like quarters. But if you sell it outside, maybe you can give yourself a little bit more time in those spots. In general, there's certain spots where I think his footwork technique also might have to change. Like, for example, those comeback routes. Like, I thought his approach, and we saw this mainly against Baltimore, I thought his footwork approach was very similar to how he, you know, kind of breaks at a lot of the top of the routes. And I think at times, like, you might have to change up how you utilize your footwork to get in and out of those breaks a lot more cleanly. I thought he improved a lot for dig routes. If you watch his footwork from the beginning of the season running dig routes to the end, it wasn't just timing, it was also the way that he utilized footwork to kind of really improve that. The ability to adjust his route stem and attack off coverage quarters. We saw it against, you know, Jamel Dean. It's very like nonchalant. I'm just gonna kind of adapt my, you know, I'm gonna adapt my vertical push. Let me slide a little bit inside here, that way we can create a little bit more space into the top of the route. He also carries that savvy where when I'm vertically pushing, dip his head and surge forward to press off coverage corner, not at full speed, but just to kind of try to push you back on the play a little bit. Now again, sometimes that approach doesn't work. Like if you're running a comeback route, it may not work because you're not getting what you want out of the corner, because if the corner's just sitting on the sticks, for example, you pushing a vertical may not separate there. So instead of worrying about that and then kind of slowing how you're going to get in and out of the break, let's change the footwork, let's change the approach, let's get yourself out of the break quicker, let's focus on that aspect. I think at times there's certain routes where, again, he's just kind of a work in progress and changing his footwork and figuring out what's going to work best for what the defender is going to do against me. If we call for a safety to anticipate, like, oh, this is going to break this direction, because he doesn't tell it. He just pushes vertically, keeps his eyes forward, and then by the time he's doing it, if a safety's not getting a step in front, he usually, again, has that vertical speed where he's going to ultimately get over top of the safety, even if they were in a better position than he was and they had to leverage early on the play. Really good with timing routes in terms of opening up other players. He was very unselfish in that sense. Right? Obviously, he wants the football, but he was super unselfish just to open other guys up. Like, okay, I know my role is just take this guy out of the play. Let me take him out of the play. I'll open you up. And he seemed to have no problem with that. He was very willing to do that, and that's what the Lions need within this offense, because you just having that threat is going to open up everything else for us, and we've seen it in many different ways, but his willingness to do that was huge. Now, I thought that he had some, at times, late reactiveness to just oncoming defenders and changing up his approach, being able to adapt. It would knock him off balance. Again, more of that was towards the early of the season that we saw him this past year. Things would kind of knock him off balance. His foot control would kind of become a little bit of a mess. I think he carries sufficient lean within the upper body to kind of work around traffic, but he doesn't carry the best traffic to work around zone traffic consistently, so being a little bit more aware a little bit earlier could probably help as well. But the level 3 post corner routes, the head movement, the change of pace out of the break to attack safeties.
I think it's also probably important to, one, think back to Alabama and the route tree that he ran, the playing time and experience that he had, and where certain routes, it looks very clean, corner, post routes, down the field, you're like, man, this looks really clean. Speed out routes, the footwork, the discipline looks beautiful. And there's other routes where during the season you felt like, okay, this makes more sense that he's running it like this, because the way he's running before, he's actually hurting his separation. Comeback routes, core routes, level 1 routes, dialing all that in consistently, even the dig routes. There's certain routes that it feels like he's just growing. And there's also the other aspect to me is just also anticipating and understanding, like, hey, cornerback is playing this coverage. What does that mean for how I need to pry it open? If he's in quarters, is the safety going to dive? Is he going to be more aggressive versus a cover 2 safety that's going to play deep? Those kind of things can come with experience, and I think the fact that we've seen it is really promising.
After the catch, he's dynamic, and we saw this last year, especially on the move. And this is where, the route types you have him on, he is dynamic with the football in his hands, right? And we've seen that. The transition speed is big time. He works himself into his transition really well. His contact balance, to me, is impressive. You see the little spin move that he throws out there. I think he's a little bit tight when you talk about, like, hey, come back to the ball, then plant, stick, and get back upfield. Like St. Brown, very, very clean with his footwork, so he can be very tight, plant, knife back upfield. It's a little bit wider for Jameson when he tries to do things like that, kind of strides out a little bit. But on the move, that's where he's really difficult. We saw he's very dynamic once the ball in his hands. He's tough. He battles forward. And then you also see that he's a little bit linear with the ball in his hands to kind of get tripped up on the legs. We saw that against the Vikings on the little screen route. To me, overall, though, I do believe, and here's my reasoning after watching all this to believe, not only was what he did last season very intriguing, because I think that he improved in a lot of areas, but it's also what we already know. And I think what we already know tells us that, hey, this should work. And here's why. Well, one, for him specifically, I think continue to dial in your release, continue to be able to use physicality, be able to lean into that at times, but also more specifically refine the footwork by route type and how the defender's playing you based on the situation. Continue to refine those looks, because he's shown improvement there and showed improvement. Continue to dial those in, because I know you're doing a lot of the other things really well. You're a ridiculous post threat. We know that you're ridiculous vertical speed. You're willing after the catch. You're tough. You're showing the football intelligence. Your hands kind of came along. Like, all the noise didn't bother him whatsoever. He just improved there. The tracking needs to improve, I think, especially on underthrows, but working over his shoulder. But the reason that it should work, let me just give you some numbers for this. So DJ Chark was here a couple seasons ago, and with DJ Chark, and I know they're not the exact same player, but I think a lot of the ways that we utilize DJ Chark can be pointed to, and okay, how did it work? Because there will be questions always go, well, I don't know if Goff can throw it far enough for this guy. The reality is yes, Goff doesn't have the biggest arm in the league. But also thinking that you're going to have plays where he's throwing it 60 yards in the air, that's not going to lead to consistent success anyway, all right? Look, we remember, like, we had Stafford in before. He could do things like that. That was an insane arm talent. You don't have that with Goff, but that's not a problem necessarily, because, again, we're a timing-based offense. So how can you make this work? Well, one, we've already seen it work. You can go back with the LA Rams, but let's just stick with DJ Chark. DJ Chark, who didn't play every game in 2022, he had 7 receptions on 15 targets for 2 touchdowns and 252 yards on passes that were 20-plus yards. And that included a 29.4% target rate, 20-plus yard passes. So 29.4% of his targets were 20-plus yard throws for DJ Chark in 2022 with the Lions. That was the 14th highest in the NFL. He didn't even play in every game, even though that wouldn't have directly moved to it unless he just kept getting more shots. But 14th, so he had the 14th highest 20-plus yard rate in the NFL, and so we know that he's going to get those targets. He was also, again, 25th in receptions and 25th in yards for 20-plus yard passes with the Lions in a league without having played in every single game. So we've already seen this work. And then when you start to look at, I think, which is the bigger question, okay, it's worked. We see the numbers. We've seen it work. But what type of routes can we run? How do we run routes that are going to work here? Well, I think we've seen it. For us, obviously, the idea of putting golf under center, a 7-step drop, play action, fire it downfield, that's not going to be very consistent, right? Especially when you go outdoors. That's not going to be consistent at yielding results. But with DJ Chark, that's not how he had results. Think about the vertical shots that we had that weren't play fakes, right? It was usually line shotgun, 3-step drop, because what that does is it helps Goff get the ball out faster, yet because he's already in the gun, he's taking that 3-step drop. They can still get vertical. It also opens up the ability for Jameson Williams to push vertically and be able to run at his full speed. But at the same time, now it already has Goff back on the play where he doesn't need to take as many steps and take longer to create the depth to then step back into the pocket and push the ball downfield. So you really shorten that process time for Jared Goff to allow it to be, hey, 15 yards and then we'll make the cut, ball's going to be up. Now you may catch it at 30 plus, but that's when the ball's got to be up. And when we saw those shot plays for DJ Chark, majority of them were that. It was Goff 3-step drop, put the ball up. And that's fine on a shot. It was the same shot. That shot against Dallas was like 50 yards, right, in the air. 3-step drop out of the shotgun, put the ball up quick, and he got hit immediately. The ball was out quick, but J-Mo's so darn fast, he covered that much ground. That's how a majority of the shot plays are going to be opened up. When you think about under center, that's where you have to open up kind of the more long-winded routes. You can't have him run vertically on a 7-step drop. It has to be the deep crossing route from one side of the field all the way across the other, and you're just asking him to run across the field. Lions try to set those up at times. Sometimes they didn't connect, but think about what we do with like Khalil Freeman. He's fast too. The Green Bay play where Goff does a complete rollout and throws it all the way back across the field. But with how the route is set up, he's not going straight. He's just covering the entire field, so it's taking a lot longer for that process. It's those kind of looks that will allow the Lions to make it work to open up those vertical shots. And the fact is, it's already worked. You could go to J-Mo, you go to DJ Chark, you go to Josh Reynolds, you can go to his time with the LA Rams. We've already seen this work. Obviously, other factors, offense line, those things. It works. The other aspect of that as well, utilizing Jameson on the fast motion to turn the corner, allow him to push vertically, helping him not only get off the line cleanly, but also, again, slowing down in practice how fast he's actually getting into that route, but also then opening up the over routes. You're allowing things to clear out. You're allowing them to work around, then push upfield vertically, get guys, kind of on their heels, racing back, bailing out of coverage, and then his over routes, his dig routes, they don't have to be as precise, like sit down and then break to the middle. Instead, he can kind of roll through it a little bit more. So it's things like that I think can help really sync the timing. And we saw that this last season. The Lions do things like that. And when they had shot plays, when they mainly had shot plays last, it's a 3-step drop out of the shotgun, not under center. And that's fine because that's where the Lions are going to get their shots, and it just makes sense for who we are. I think overall, when you look at this, like, is this going to be Jameson's breakout year? Honestly, all signs point to it should be. It absolutely should be his breakout year. What Dan Campbell said, it should be. This should be your breakout year. The opportunities are going to be there. You grew so much just through last season alone. You're getting a full season this time around. We're not hopefully having you, out till week 5. You're going to get full season. And again, it's another full offseason to just work with the golf dial in that timing. This should be your break. There's no one really sitting in front of you. It's like he's going to take my snap. I mean, St. Brown, yes. But you have the opportunity to really take snaps over anybody as long as you can play those roles, as long as you can open up more and more variety within your game. We know how you can win now, open up more variety, and you'll continue to see the field. But overall, this was the guy that rose in the playoffs. This was the guy that while Peoples-Jones didn't take snaps, and maybe some of that was just kind of, how long he had been here, Jameson Williams took snaps to the playoffs, right? Those grew throughout the season. And I think that means a lot to what the Lions understand that he's very capable of. So to me, yes, this should be his breakout season. There's no reason it's not his breakout season. Everything is lined up for him to do so, and I think that he's had the right approach. He's had the toughness. He hasn't cared about the outside noise, and he plays with the football intelligence and the selflessness to make it happen. So with that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prep, for watching, and I'm out.